You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks, and a very special episode brought to you from the National Space Centre in Leicester, where Return of the Garrison took place a few weeks ago, and myself and my illustrious co-host, who's going to introduce himself any moment, were there covering it for Fantha Tracks. Unnamed person, introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Unnamed Person, so insert your own name here. No, that's right, it's Mark Mulcaster from the Rebel Legion and the UK Garrison and the Mando Mercs and the Sabre Guild now as well, because I've just cleared with them. So yeah, another costume club to my belt, which is overflowing with lightsabers and other cool trinkets.
Not a lot then, not a lot. We've got an episode where Paul Naylor of Start Your Engines and Fantha Tracks fame had the chance to sit down and chat with Bob Brechin. He was the chief designer at Palitoy for many, many years. It's a fascinating interview, and also the panel that Bob did on stage in the Sir Patrick Moore Planetarium at the National Space Centre, part of Return of the Garrison. But before we get to that, Mark, I would like to ask you a question. It may be an either-or question or a yes or no question, but hopefully there's more depth to it than that. Otherwise, my questioning skills are dead. And the question is, toys.
Yes.
When you collect, and you are a collector, when you're collecting these toys and these collectibles, because we're grown-ups, they're not toys, they're collectibles. They're in the box, they're collectibles. If they're out the box, they're toys. Do you think that the connection to them is purely the memories they evoke from the films that they are based upon? Or do you think there's a large element that harkens back to your childhood? Do you think there's something tangible about the history of toys and the lineage of toys? Because Bob was part of Palitoy, which then got bought by Kenner, which then got bought by Hasbro, and there is a lineage to all of this. Do you think there's one thing, or do you think it's many?
Yes, I think it's many.
I knew it was a one-answer question.
I think it's many, and I think it's many for many reasons, actually, because, for example, being in a slightly out of the first generation Star Wars fandom that I am. I'm just after that, I was kind of going through it in the dark times, and also brought a lot of my Star Wars, especially my vintage stuff, especially the stuff I played with, was like second hand. So I had no real concept of branding back then. It was just Star Wars stuff. It's interesting how people of that first original generation, such as yourself and good friends of mine like Phil Park and like Susie and that, for them it seems like Palitoy is a bigger deal. But for me, I always tend, when I'm buying vintage stuff, and this might be a bit blasphemous coming from a UK resident, but I tend to always try and buy the Kenner stuff, even going back to the 77 play sets. Right now, my eye line is the Creature Cantina, which has got a nice little blue Kenner logo on it. So, for example, over the pandemic, I got that slight nostalgia itch to go and revisit the mid-90s Power of the Force 2 action figures, which were Kenner labelled, blended into and then merged into Hasbro. And those were the figures when I was kind of 13, 14 and just started to get a bit of like income from paper rounds and stuff. That's what I was buying. So that's where my nostalgia is. So I think it really does depend on a number of things. I was 18, 19 when the prequels came out. I was 17, in fact, when the Phantom Menace came out. And there is actually a little bit of nostalgia when I look at some of that stuff and, when we talk about it. And I think that's the thing. I think the nostalgia comes from talking to people and, yourself, how crazy it was, because it's early days of the internet, really. The shared experience of all having to try and download on a 56 kbm like modem over the phone, that first Phantom Menace trailer and stuff like that. That's one of those things that is kind of like a shared experience. A bit like, I guess, when people went to Celebration and saw the Chewie We're Home trailer for The Force Awakens. It's interesting because I think you put different collectors in the room, and if they had the choice of exactly the same vehicle, let's take a Millennium Falcon in exactly the same condition, and one said Kenner on it and the other one said Palitoy, different people would gravitate to different ones. people who kind of grew up with the Palitoy, and obviously that's the British brand of the vintage Star Wars figures, it's an interesting kind of choice and taste, and and neither is right or wrong, with the exception of probably the Death Star playset, because everybody wants a Palitoy Death Star playset. Nobody really wants the Kenner one. It's not quite as good.
The point of nostalgia isn't fixed.
Yeah.
For everyone. If you compare that to Phantom Menace, like you say, I get kind of nostalgic for Phantom Menace, and I was 28 when Phantom Menace came out, and for weirdly the reasons you say, it was fairly early days of the internet and all of that exploding, and the first real trilogy in whole. Obviously, I was 28. I was very aware that I was going to be able to experience this completely as a whole chunk, whereas Star Wars, I was 6.
Yeah.
So it kind of came to me, and I didn't know there was going to be a second one, and then Empire. It was just so different. Jedi, we kind of knew. We knew we were getting 3 when Phantom came out, 3 movies. So that was fascinating. That's a great point. And also, mostly for Star Wars, an awful lot for Empire, it was Palitoy. By the time Jedi came round, there was a lot more. I kept pretty much all my card backs. And for Jedi, the vast majority, Kenner, which is crazy living where I live.
Yeah.
I lived there, and I live in Burtwood now, and I lived in Burtwood as a kid, and Leicester's only, an hour, not even that, to Colville, which is where they were made. And yet these figures were coming from all over the place. So that's an interesting thought. But yeah, I think there's a very complicated, in a good way, complicated relationship between toys and memory and nostalgia. And like you say, you put 2 Millennium Falcons in the room. That's a good analogy, which one is a lot of people going to go for. And you could even expand it beyond that. You put an original boxed Falcon, 1980 Empire Falcon, which is what I got originally. And then you put a BMF in the room. Do you get lured by the nostalgia of that original Falcon? Or is it the pull, the financial lure of a beautiful BMF coming into your life, So let's swing back to the National Space Centre in Leicester. This is Paul having a good chat with Bob Brechin from Palitoy, chief designer in the golden era of Palitoy, talking all about those days and much more besides.
I'm Bob Brechin. I was chief designer at Palitoy, and I was there at Palitoy from 1967 to 1984.
Wow.
Yeah, Roger Morrison. I was tooling manager at Palitoy. I was there 9 years. I think I started in 76, I think.
Right.
If I remember
so
right.
you were there for the Star Wars run then?
Correct,
so you two worked closely together?
Yeah.
Well, we used to pass designs on to Roger, and you got them made as tools,
Yeah.
Bob would do the drawings, or the office would do the drawings, and then I'd progress that to get in injection moulding or blow moulding tools made to produce whichever toy we was making. But at the time we were producing a lot of different toys. Board games, everything.
Yeah, everything.
So as representatives of Palitoy, I think you were saying to me before that you took a trip out to Kenner.
We took a trip to Kenner in November '77.
Yeah.
We were both sent out to Cincinnati in Ohio.
And what was happening there then? So you got to see the...
It was the first shots coming off, wasn't it?
It was the first shots of the Star Wars vehicles.
Yeah.
And obviously we went over because we knew we were going to be doing them in the UK. In the UK, what we used to do with Kenner, we used to loan the moulds, their injection moulds, and then put them out to trade moulders in the UK.
Right.
But you did do toolings for 2 others.
I was just going to say, and of course, sometimes the American market being huge, they wouldn't release the loan tools, or they were behind on a certain item. So we used to have to then make the tools in the UK. So what I used to do, I used to get the wooden patterns, which are usually 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 size, and then from those I can manufacture the steel tools. I used to get the steel tools made in the UK, and then we could obviously mould them wherever. But always on very, very tight schedules. They were always very tight schedules because they've obviously booked the advertising on TV, and we've got to make sure we've got the tools, we've approved it.
You've got the moulder set up, haven't you?
Yeah. There's lots of things, and colour. The colour's got to be right.
Yeah.
And if, for instance, there's like 14 moulds on a vehicle, they wouldn't be all at one company. They'd be at several companies.
Right.
So you've got to make sure that
they all fit.
That's right, and also buy in the correct materials and pigments for the colour, because you didn't want somebody doing a dark grey, somebody doing a light grey on an input. So I mean, there was a lot. It was interesting, very interesting.
Some of the figures and the vehicles that have got out into the community, as it were, might be in different colours, because when the tour was finished, Roger would actually test it, but they wouldn't have the material at the time because purchasing had to buy it in bulk, you know.
Yeah.
So they'd have a bit of plastic lying around on the floor, wouldn't they, Roger?
Yeah, because the correct grade, because obviously different plastics shrink at different rates.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously it was the same, but it might be natural as opposed to pigmented.
Yeah.
Because the master batch comes in a powder.
Yeah.
And then you mix it with virgin plastic and process it through, and then obviously melt it into little pellets.
Yeah.
And then you add a percentage of that, like 6%. With virgin material, and it comes out the colour you want.
So that's obviously for things like, say, the original Chewbacca figure, where it's predominantly brown, so you've just got that one pigment to work with. Yeah. Now, obviously, these figures have been around a long time now, and some of them you might pick up a Wampa, for example. You've got a yellow body with his arms and legs, but he's still pretty much the colour that they used to be. So I mean, that's that kind of degradation that you get over time, isn't it?
Yeah. But some of the collectors have got these figures that we put together with all odds of colours, you know, just to test.
That's right, yeah.
It's to test the moulds.
Yeah.
And also to test the fits.
And then, funnily enough, they've now brought a range of those figures out.
They have, haven't they?
Yeah.
Hasbro's brought a range out like that, different colours.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Because Roger was mentioning it today. Tell us that when we had that thing at Palitoy, the made the toys be with you, and we were sitting around talking. And that guy had a figure. It was indifferent.
It was obviously a conference. You got the collectors, and we were on a front table. Anyhow, one guy said, "I've got this particular figure," and he had Wellingtons on the figure. Did you can tell I'm an engineer. I don't know what the figures are, and I worked on them. But anyhow, and he said the boot on this is slightly bigger than the boot on another of these figures. Why is this? So Bob said, well, he says, I don't really know. He said, what do you think, Roger? I said, well...
They passed it round the group, dead carefully, like this, you know?
Like
and it came through Roger, he didn't know. It came to me, and I looked at it. I don't know. And I just threw it back to him like that.
And the guy went white. He paid $7,000 or certainly several £1,000s for this figure. And Bob's throwing it across the room like that.
Do you know what? I reckon if they'd made the boot slightly bigger, it might purely have been so it stood up better as a figure.
Well, probably.
So a bit of weight.
It was more to do the like a Wellington. It was the length of the Wellington.
Right,
You know, so say one was down there, this other one was about there. It wasn't as much as that, obviously.
I've got the elastic in the top, the socks will come down.
But I mean, they are looking at minute differences, aren't they? If you know what I mean.
So, the collecting market.
When he caught it with a sort of on his face, you know, he was looking.
He went white.
He went white. I said, if anybody's filmed that, they said that's worth another £1,000 on there. So I want to cut to that.
Yeah, definitely.
And he caught it so well, signed him up for the cricket team.
Yeah.
So you were telling me earlier, Bob, that the key differences between the vehicles was certainly in that first year, where Palitoy had got the license and in a way to be able to hit a certain cost point, certain elements from the Kenner ones were removed from the Palitoy toys, such as electronics and other features. So just explain how that all came about.
Well, as Roger said, most of the tools were loaned from Kenner.
Yeah.
We have them for like 6 to 8
because it was the first
weeks.
year. Because it was the first year.
Yeah.
You know, it was the first year, so they didn't invest so much into it. You know, they was sort of stepping carefully. You know, so we couldn't get the tool in for Landspeeder.
Yeah, Landspeeder and the X-Wing
fighter.
Fighter.
So you got as you said, you got the patterns for that.
I got the patterns over, and then we just redesigned it slightly. With regards to leaving the electrics out the X-Wing, and then the bonnet, wasn't it, on the Landspeeder?
Just to meet that price point, you know.
Yeah. So
it's like some of the things we couldn't take, like the Death Star, the Kenner Death Star, massive, great big plastic. I mean, it never fit into the British market, you know, and we wouldn't want it anyway. So it wasn't very good. Not in my mind.
Well, personally, I think the playability when I was a kid of the cardboard version was so much more than that Kenner version anyway. I think the Americans would love more of those over there,
but that was the problem in this country, was getting the right price. When they marketing worked out the price list, They had the price for the figures, which was, I think was 99p, was it?
When they first came out, 99p. Yeah.
But they had to be advised next to all the vehicles because we didn't know how much they were going to cost until Roger started moulding them.
I was going to say, and also, obviously, the tooling tended to be over-engineered.
Yeah.
So the mould would be very big, width and height.
Yeah.
So it meant that the injection moulding machine you had to put it on was a big machine.
Yeah.
And of course, with the bigger machine, the higher the overheads, so the items are going to cost more. Well, they could lose some of that in America just with the volume they do it.
Yeah,
but we hadn't got that volume in the UK at that time.
I certainly had the Palitoy version of the land speeder. I think that was the first vehicle I had.
Yeah.
And it was only a couple of years after that, I also managed to pick up the Kenner one. And I thought, why is this one got a bonnet? So you've explained that brilliantly.
Well, it did make it a bit cheaper, and it cut a moulding out, didn't it? So, I mean, how many moulds was involved in that?
I would say wheels. I would say probably 6.
6.
Yeah.
You've got the seats,
6,
they're a
7.
separate thing.
And the windscreen.
But they would be multi-cavities.
Oh yeah.
So
you make full cavities.
Taking out a moulding, like the bonnet, would make it smaller, wouldn't it?
Yeah. They're usually individual moulds, if you know what I mean, for each component.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can make it a composite or more of a family tool if the components looked of a similar size.
Yeah.
So that they all plastic, the molten plastic went into the cavities evenly.
Yeah.
But you didn't want something that was going to weigh, I don't know, say 100 grams and a little item that's 1 gram.
Yeah.
Because then you've got technical problems with moulding.
Yeah.
It can be done, don't get it like airfix kits, but they are difficult.
Did you do any hot runner models?
Yeah, hot runners,
for Star Wars.
Yeah. I did.
Explain what hot runner is.
It basically a plastic component is fed through a nozzle. And a screw goes round. Plastic goes down the screw, melting. It's melted, and then goes through the nozzle and into the tool.
And it has a run around, doesn't it?
Yeah, when the tool opens, there's a runner feed.
Like an
all
airfix
the components.
kit.
Yeah.
And there's a sprue, an item that's in the side, the nozzle bush.
Right.
A hot runner feeds directly onto the component. And I think, if I remember rightly, the Millennium Falcon is a hot runner tool.
Right.
The molten plastic feeds directly onto the component.
You haven't got that thing going round.
And you haven't got the regrind of the runner system and the nozzle. So it obviously brings the cost down because you're not going to reprocess that material and regrind it or lose some of it through scrap.
Yeah.
So it's direct feed.
Because I mean, I suppose back in the day when the Millennium Falcon and the Attack Walker came out, those were the two big vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
I think they retailed around £35, £40 at the time, which back then would have been quite a significant amount of money for parents to
It was only because Star Wars got really, really successful we could do that. First year
definitely.
we were a bit nervous. You know? Everybody was a bit nervous.
Very.
Like I said in my talk, doing toys from a film wasn't on because if a film bombed out, you left all these toys on the shelf.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I suppose in some way that's why the Star Wars, it famously, obviously, there was the early bird toy pack where you could buy a gift certificate, basically, weren't you? Because the toys weren't ready in time and they hadn't anticipated the success of the film.
Yeah, that's right.
But it is interesting that it really was the first toy, or certainly the first successful toy that was brought down to that smaller scale, purely because the vehicles and the associated sort of creatures were going to be produced to go with them, and so they needed to be smaller, otherwise they would cost a fortune.
Yeah, sure.
So, was there anything that you remember doing any developmental work on that didn't make it to product? Was there anything that we didn't? No.
There was that big range that John Hawkes.
That was Action Man.
Yeah, that was Action Man.
Action Man we did, We did
some
Action
futuristic
not on Star
vehicles.
Wars.
Yeah, but not on
Star Wars. No, after the first year, we didn't do any design and development.
Right.
It was just bringing the tools in from the Kenner, wasn't it?
Right. A lot of them loaning the tools, and of course, a lot of the product was coming from the States, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it started off as the figures were coming in bulk to start with, and then we were packing them into the blisters
blister
in
packs.
the factory on Illig machines, they were called.
Yeah.
I've seen some
And
historical video of them packing the
That's
stuff.
right.
Yeah.
And then later on, they were bringing them in actually on the cards,
Yeah. And did you collect any yourself? Did you think, oh, this could be worth a fortune in a few years? If only.
No. The only story I was telling somebody today, the only story that I got at Palitoy, quite a long office, quite a big office. Yeah. And of course, I was bringing in first off samples, and I'd be fixing them together, make sure the fits were right. If they weren't, at least I could then tell a toolmaker to do this or that, to rectify if there was a problem. But there usually wasn't a problem. Anyhow, I got this office full of all bits of plastic, and of course some of them had been stuck together. And I didn't go into work very often on a Saturday, but I had to go in one Saturday. And I got 3 sons, but I took 2 of my sons with me. And I walked into the office, and it was just as though they were going into an Aladdin's cave or a sweet shop. Yeah. They're seeing all these toys, because you're working with them every day. You just see them as bits of plastic, precisely. And I mean, they did have some of the original ones of those to play with, but like anything, I mean, they didn't keep them. They got destroyed. Well, they played with them. So,
mine was. Yeah. I mean, I've still got a lot of my stuff, and it was well played with. I had the cardboard Death Star bomb. Now I loved that. I did love that. Yeah. And unfortunately, I sold it when I got about 14 or 15 to a cousin, regretfully now. And I had the vinyl Cape Jaguar as well.
Oh, crikey.
Vinyl Cape Jaguar.
And I sold that for about 50p. So any stories around the vinyl Cape Jaguar? Is that a decision that was made here to change it to the cloth cape, or did that come from Kenner?
I don't know where. I know there's a difference, no.
It's a logistic thing, I think.
Yeah, it all seemed to come about.
It's like some of the weapons, they got into different things.
Yeah.
Because they'd come over when everything was loose, I mean, some of those weapons went into Action Force.
Yes.
Because they'd have a big
tray,
massive, great big carton of weapons or something, and.
Well, you've got somebody that's working on a line, just putting these things together. Right. They've got no real interest in the product.
No.
Well, it's not them; it's the people that feed the line. The
operators on there, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, we can't afford to get them back from Hong Kong for this Action Force. We'll use some of these phaser pistols from Star Wars. What they're called.
So, do you remember the point where you thought this range is really successful? Was there a
when the second film came out.
It was when The Empire Strikes Back came out.
It took off enormously, and obviously the volumes. The companies who were manufacturing the plastic components, they're getting bigger orders. Say, crikey, we've got to do X amount. And of course, there's always urgency to get them in, assembled at Palitoy and out in the shop. So
when it first came out, Star Wars, because the people were so reluctant to take something from a film. Our sales people and marketing, they couldn't get the retailers to buy the stuff,
Really?
But when The Empire Strikes Back came out, we couldn't make enough for it,
No. Yeah. They're knocking on your door.
They're knocking. I want some more.
Yeah.
Certainly the figures as well. We had duplicate masters over here as well. To make our own tools, but they were manufactured. Most of the American market was from Hong Kong. So we sent castings out there so they could supply Europe, if you like, with the action. Well, with the Star Wars figures.
That's when it went all European.
That's right.
When everything went sort of global.
Mirror Meccano, wasn't it?
And
Toll Toys.
That's it in Australia. But that's when the trilingual packaging came out. With the English, French, and German. Trilogo, you call it. Trilogo. So you can move the product around Europe. Didn't sell in Germany. You can move over to France.
Were you still there, Bob, when the coins came into coins? They started selling them with a coin. I think you probably left just before that.
I left in '84.
Yeah. So the Power of the Force line, as they called it.
Power of the Force line.
85. So they would repackage them on another card with a collectible coin, basically.
I didn't know what
I think you would have just missed that. But you were certainly there for the heyday.
We were there for the heyday.
So when the Return of the Jedi came around, the figure line for that, and they launched straight away with 17 figures, which they'd never done before. Clearly by then, the expectations, Empire Strikes Back had done really well for you. Jedi came out. Did you still see it as being, was it still mega popular, the Return of the Jedi ones? It seemed to start going quieter around, I would have said 85, 86.
That's why they did Power of the Force, wasn't it? To try and keep it going.
When we have the meet-up occasionally with ex-Palitoy employees, there was a salesman there, Bob, who was dealing with the Woolworths buyer.
It's one of these big buyers, it was John Nicholas.
And he went down to see him and he said, these figures and that. The gist of it was the buyer ordered 1 million figures.
Wow.
1 million figures.
That's the biggest order ever taken.
Yeah.
For Palitoy.
I bet he started working his commission out.
Yeah.
I'm all right.
Yeah.
Buy that house.
Yeah. But at that time...
He did say it cost him a bottle of scotch.
He did, yeah. He had to take a bottle of scotch.
He got the buyer. I don't know whether he was.
We can bleep that.
It was that time, I think it was between Empire and Jedi.
Yeah.
That's when the BBC came to Colville.
Yeah.
It must have been about 82 time.
Yes,
something like that. And they came to do a little film on Star Wars because it was so big and this hype and everything. And that's when they called Palitoy a gold mine on top of a coal mine.
Yeah.
Because the Snibston coal mine was underneath.
Yeah, straight under.
And the wives and the daughters and the mums and were working in the factory, assembling the toys.
Yeah, it was a major employer for the area.
Oh yeah. 1,000 people at Palitoy at the height at that time.
Probably the video that I saw from around 82.
Yeah. But 3 years after that film was by the BBC, Palitoy had gone, became Kenneth Parker, and the coal mine had gone.
Yeah.
So the gold mine had gone and the coal mine had gone.
Yeah.
So it's a bit. Colville was a bit drab in that period.
It went from being a real sort of like prosperous
people
area.
lost jobs.
Yeah. Some engineering companies who used to make the needles and that, didn't they?
Greaves, that was the company.
Yeah, Greaves, that's right. Yeah,
they've gone.
For hosiery and what have you.
Etoffs and all sorts of companies like that in Colville. It was a bit of a drab time. What sprung up at that time was holiday companies and betting shops. Because all the miners were being made redundant with a big packet,
Yeah. What are they going to want to spend it on?
What are they going to spend it on? They're going to go on holiday and they're going to bet.
Yeah.
And that was what was springing up in Colville.
Yeah, well, bless them.
Yeah.
So one last question and then I'll go. Have you got a favourite product that you worked on? Is there anything?
Oh, you know what mine is, don't you?
Yeah, go for
the
it.
Death Star.
Yeah.
Just explain to our listeners what it was that was so special about that.
Well, it's about the only thing we really designed because Kenner was controlling all the development.
It's totally unique, isn't it?
And we couldn't, as I said, we couldn't afford that big plastic chunk of thing that they did. It started. There's a company an agency in London, which dealt with all stuff to do with Star Wars. They dealt with 20th Century Fox. So they had to prove anything that was being done in the UK that had the Star Wars name on. It could have been Bedlinen or, So everything had to be approved through them.
Yeah.
So they must have had a young lad in the office and he'd been to see the film. And he mocked up this cardboard Death Star. It was all stuck together with glue and everything, But it was good.
Yeah.
And it went through marketing to us and we decided to do it. So we had to design it so it could work.
And had that young man designed it as a dome straight away?
Yeah, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Like a dome. Yeah. That's what attracted us to it because it looked like a Death Star.
Yeah.
Whereas the Kenner one.
It's like a shopping centre.
Well, I describe it as a section of an orange cut in half, standing on the flat bit,
Yeah.
Whereas ours, even though it was only half a
half a sphere.
It looked something like a Death Star.
Yeah.
So we had to make it work. Making it work means it's got to be a flat pack.
Yeah.
To go in a smaller box, you don't want a massive great box.
Yeah.
So it had to design. So you have to design it on certain side, standard card widths to print on.
Yeah.
So you've got to fit in all
what
that.
Quality stock can we get away with?
Quality stock and all that business. So you've got to work all that out. And then you've got to say, well, the kid's got to assemble this.
Yeah.
Now, the one he did, it was all stuck together with bits of card. And that tunnel thing was quite complicated. So we had to make it so it's flat. You just fold it round and just slot it in.
Yeah.
So a child could do it,
Yeah.
So, and we added things like the trash compactor.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed much tooling.
No.
That was a real...
The chute.
Chute, yeah.
So you had to make a little tool for that.
Yeah.
But that was a real clever sort of just very simple mechanism
just
of
a
being
little
able to close it and sort of have a detention block, I suppose, if you didn't have
But
it.
kids wanted to sort of recreate the film.
Yeah.
So you had to add bits like that, didn't you?
Yeah, it's all the story elements.
Yeah, the story and all that. And because we couldn't afford much tooling, we had to vacuum form the top, the little
clear canopy.
Yeah.
And then we pinched a couple of cannons off the
X-wing.
X-wing.
Yeah.
You had the tools for them, didn't you?
Yeah.
So.
But it's a beautiful piece.
But I sort of oversaw the design of that and offered comments and that. But the real designer was Brian Turner.
Okay.
Yeah. He was one of the designers in the department. He designed the little clip, so it was. If you had two of them, it could clip together.
And I think that clip still existed for Action Force and other things.
Yeah, we put it. Well,
colours.
Different colour.
And the other thing as well, and we were talking earlier about this, Bob, is the ingenious way to try and give it some depth in the central core.
That was Brian again. You see, because Brian was
stickers.
He started off at Palitoy as the display manager.
Yeah.
And one of his tricks was to use a lot of mirrors.
Yeah.
So at the toy fair.
Yeah. So you
could
got
see
like army.
Yeah. And that was his idea. He's put a bit of mirror stuff at the bottom.
Yeah.
And when you look down, it looks like it goes on forever. Like it did in the film.
Yeah. It's so clever.
So that was Brian, and he designed the clip. He said, I designed that clip because R2D2, the robot. I designed it to look a bit like a robot. Yeah. It's got all those little pimples on it.
It's got little greebles and things, circles and squares.
So for Star Wars, that was obviously the one for me.
Yeah.
I don't know about Roger, but
is there anything that you?
No, the interesting one was Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We had the tooling over for that from the States, but what they couldn't provide us was one item, which was the top canopy or the top plate that goes on top.
Yeah.
Because that tool was obviously not meeting their output requirements, so they had to keep it in America and keep it in production.
Are we talking about the panel that slots in?
That's right, that panel there, at the top. So we obviously had to get that made very, very quickly, with no tooling aids or anything. So, got the tool made very quickly, but it was cast in beryllium copper. And we made a pattern ourselves of obviously the original moulding, and then putting a little bit of extra on it to allow for shrinkages, so it come out the right size. And we obviously had to get the tooling made quickly to complement all the other mouldings that were already in production in the UK with trade moulders. So all of a sudden a tool maker, instead of having something like 8 to 10 weeks to make the tool, all of a sudden he's got to get it done within 4 to 5 weeks. So people, and they did, and I say it was a casting. The reason I say that is because obviously then you're relying on another supplier to produce the beryllium copper castings. Then you got the tool maker, and then you got another company that probably do the polishing and finishing of it. So you got 3 companies there. They've all got to get it done quickly. But I mean they did, and it came out all right. But I think that was the other thing when we went to America. One of the reasons we went, or I particularly, was to meet your contacts who you were going to be dealing with regards to Star Wars, as you were, Bob.
Yeah.
And we met our relative. Who were in similar positions there.
And we were entertained very well, weren't we? Very friendly.
Very hospitable.
Taken to their homes. There's one guy, he was in charge of the model shop, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he had he wanted to show us his pride and joy in the garage. Was it an F-type Jag, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He had sent over from England or something.
Trying to show you his British link.
Yeah. They love the British.
Yeah.
Oh, chaps, it's been an absolute delight talking to you.
But there was a lot of travelling involved on my side. I couldn't get enough suppliers, like tool makers, in the UK because we're putting so much tooling out. And there are other companies like Hot Point, Hoover. I mean, they were using English, so I finished up having to go Portugal.
Oh yeah,
as well. So,
that was okay. That was okay.
Yeah, that was very nice. I didn't go in clothes, just took my swimming trunks. But again, it meant developing the market there. You go over there, and you want to make sure if you're going into a big company and they've got big American companies they're dealing with, I've got to go in there and show myself to be bigger than the Americans and taking a priority because I was always on to tight schedules. And we did that. And the guy who worked for me,
Chris Ward.
He sent him out there full time for about a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah.
But what Chris Ward had to do at the end, didn't he?
Destroy the tools.
He had to destroy all the tools.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
And he had a man from the ministry come and look at him while he got a big lump hammer.
Oh yeah, somebody had to watch him.
And he smashed up the cavities inside the moulds with this big lump hammer. And then a chap come on a lorry, took him off for scrap.
My background before I joined Palitoy was Castleoid, which was obviously linked to Palitoy, and I was used there to obviously producing high volume injection moulding tools, and they were hardened steel.
Yeah.
And that principle I brought to Palitoy. Yeah. Because when I came, they'd got an Action Man tool, and it's what I call a family tool. So on this tool, there was every item to make an Action Man figure. Yeah. And there was always maintenance on these tools. I think they got 4 tools or 5 at Palitoy.
Yeah, there were copies of G.I. Joe, weren't there?
There was always 3 or 2 in toolmakers being repaired. Yeah. So,
but they were made in Portugal. Because that's where Hasbro went to make G.I. Joe in Portugal.
Yeah. Well, so the Americans used Portugal a lot. Yeah. It was important that we.
Yeah.
But
you can understand the logistics of getting a toy from when we thought it up in design, getting it through to production. There's a lot of work and keeping to the schedule, you know, like Roger was saying.
So would you have been involved in the production of the Death Star? I mean, you're used to working primarily in plastics, but the cardboard.
No, I'd be the clip and the slide.
But you had to make sure it got there in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the logistics of that are quite complicated.
I'm going to say, I'm more involved in some of the components. You know, for instance, it might be, say for instance, it wasn't in this particular instance, but say like the X-Wing, and you got an issue probably with one of the components that's not fitting or something like that. By adjusting the injection moulding machine, by running the tool in hotter or cooler, increasing the cycle time or reducing it, technically, you could overcome some problems. But my background through Castleoid was obviously on the machinery, obviously on engineering, and obviously on costings as well. You know what things cost. So I was
do anything as long as you.
That's right. So it was a good background to go to Palitoy with regards to what knowledge I'd got. Which was very good.
We were lucky to get him.
Yeah. It sounds like you got on well together. You worked well together.
No problem. No.
And did you imagine that all these years later you'd be coming along to things like this to talk about making things?
No. I mean, Bob's been involved more than I, but it is, isn't it, Bob? It's
an eye-opener, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I bet you get people coming up to both of you thanking you for their childhood.
Oh, they do.
What about when we did the Action Man? When we sent him up
into space? We sent him into space
people
as well.
coming there taking photos and autographs. It was like being a footballer, you know. Never expected.
They never found that Action Man, you know.
No, somebody.
It went up into space, 12 miles.
Came back down.
No. It's one of these high altitude weather balloons. Goes up 12 miles. And it gets bigger and bigger because the pressure's less and less up there, and it explodes. But it's also at minus 50 degrees. So the plastic didn't like that.
No.
So when the balloon burst, it burst the capsule. And Action Man fell out. And it's all on film on YouTube. It fell out, and they couldn't find it.
No.
And it's still AWOL.
Action Man goes AWOL. There you go.
It's probably sitting on some little kid's bedside table, you know. He's found it in the field.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time. That's been brilliant.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Both days at Return of the Garrison at the National Space Centre, Bob Reekin did a talk in the Patrick Moore Planetarium. Beautiful room, fantastic for such occasions. We recorded both of those talks, and here, in its entirety, no edits, no trimming, no chopping, it's the whole thing as is. It's Bob on stage talking about his career and the history of Palitoy and Star Wars' place within it, here at the National Space Centre, part of Return of the Garrison.
It wasn't Palitoy then. It was actually started here in Leicester, not very far from this centre. And there was a young man, he was about 18 going on 19, he was the chief typewriter salesman for a company called Branson's. But he had itchy feet. He wanted to be his own boss. So what did he do? He went down to London with a soapbox, plastic soapbox, and he got an order from Woolworths. And he came back and he started a factory in, Britannia Street in Leicester. And his name was Alfred Edward Pallet. And at the time, plastics were just coming in after the First World War. The first sort of semi-synthetic plastics was developed in about 1860, and that was celluloid. And he started making toys in celluloid, and he called his company Castleloid. And his first toy was one of these, the Flit-a-Fast windmill, the sort of thing you buy at the seaside and put on your sandcastle. And that was first made in 1920. It was last sold by Palitoy in 1964, so it went on for a long while. His first doll was this, Diddums. And this was drawings by Mabel Lucy Atwell, and obviously an early example of character merchandising, which we get a lot of these days. And he went on to make lots and lots of other dolls, all made in this material, celluloid. Come the 30s, people were getting to know that this company was doing really well, Castleloid. They were one of the best factories in Leicester to work for. They got a medal for the best output of toys and other things in Leicestershire. But this company, Bakelite Xylonite, came in and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, basically. And they bought him out, and they built him a new factory on Abbey Lane, which is just outside, on the main road just outside here. Now, during the 30s, Castleloid used to show their toys and their other things that they made at the British Industries Fair, which was in London and also in Birmingham. And one particular year, a very important lady came by the name of Queen Mary. And Queen Mary was the grandmother of our late Queen. And she said to Alf, he was known as Alf, can you get rid of could you get rid of celluloid in toys? Because it's inflammable. Well, we all knew that, and they knew that. But he said, yeah, give me a year, come back next year, and I'll see what I can do. So the next year she came back on the stand, and Alf presented her with two dolls made of a material called Bexoid, which was non-flammable. And, here's our late Queen as a child with her dolls, and that particular doll at the front looks very much similar to the Bexoid doll that Alf gave to Queen Mary. And I'm going to pause it at this point. You've already seen the picture. I'm going to pause it just for a few seconds so we can have some thoughts about the historic and momentous things that are going on at the time. So, okay. It was the same time in the mid-30s that Castleloid thought they should have a name for the toys. And they came up with the name Palitoy Playthings, obviously in homage to Alf Pallet. And the name was registered and the logo, and there's the logo there. It wasn't actually used until Castleloid bought it was an old billiard hall in Colville. They needed more manufacturing space. And that's for the first time that the Palitoy Playthings logo was used. But they also bought 3.5 acres of land behind that building. And you can see that's the building, the old billiard hall, and they built a new factory on the 3.5 acres behind. And if you look at the next slide, you can see what it looks like now on the right. You can see the old billiard hall here and the factory that was built on the 3.5 acres. And this is what Palitoy eventually ended up looking like. and that's the present day. And it was like that when Palitoy finished in the 80s. And then the Second World War came along, and all the factories of Castleoid, there was 2 in Leicester, 1 in Stamford, and the one at Colville, were all taken over for the war effort. At Colville, they were making gas masks and undercarriages for fighter planes. But after the war, lots of new manufacturing techniques were coming in and processes, and one of them was injection moulding. Now, Castleoid in Leicester, they bought the first industrial injection moulding machine from just before the war, about 1937, but didn't do much with it. But after the war, they started moulding planes and things. But that machine, ironically, was bought before the war from Germany. The other process that was blow moulding. When the Castleoid people went over to America after the war, it was a delegation to look at new things, they saw this blow moulding machine in America, and there was only one of them. And they said, oh, we want one of those. Can you make another one and send it over to Leicester? And that's what they did. So all it did was mould little 2-inch diameter bottles. But Castleoid went on to develop other things, like this is a talcum powder container, and they were the first ones to actually do the Jif lemon, which got into many kitchens and houses and so forth. But the main thing they were doing later on, as they developed this blow moulding process, was containers for washing up liquid. These blue ones are, they're called carboys, and they're for chemicals and things like that. But that process could also make dolls. So they got away from the celluloid again. These dolls were made in high-density polyethylene, and they were blow moulded. So all this change and developments, the press at the time called Castleoid the House of Constant Progress. So we're going on to the 50s now, and in the 50s they were developing more toys, and they had a strap line for the marketing, which was girls and boys love Palitoys. And one of the big changes in the 50s was the development of what was called petal skin PVC. PVC was a softer material than the blown dolls or the Bexoid dolls, and because it was soft and pliable, it was made by a process called rotational casting. They developed a way of stitching hair in, which was nylon filaments. So this was in the Daily Mirror as Yvonne with rooted hair, the doll of the century. And Palitoy went on to make loads and loads of these dolls at Colville using that method of stitching the hair in. Coming up to the 60s, BXL decided they didn't want to go into toys anymore. They wanted to get rid of the toys and concentrate on the blow moulding, the containers and other things like plastic film and all sorts of tubing. They did a lot of tubing and stuff like that. So they wanted to get out of toys and they wanted to sell it off. And they got in a guy called Miles Fletcher, who was he was an export sales manager for Fisons. Now there's a Fisons used to be up in Loughborough, and there was a guy called Bob Simpson who was he started off at Castleoid as just a ledger clerk really, but he built himself up and became marketing manager. So the two of them were sent off to Colville with a load of staff. And told to make some of these toys so that somebody might buy the whole brand. So what do? They wanted some toys that could go on TV, because TV advertising was just starting in the start of the 60s. The first TV advert for a toy was Mr. Potato Head in America in 1954. The first one in this country was for Cindy, which was like a competitor of Barbie. That was made by Pedigree Toys. But they got this toy called, on the left, which is Tressie. Now, Tressie had a secret. Her hair grew. So that top knot on the top, if you pulled it, her hair got longer because it was all stored inside her body. And then you had a little key that you could wind it back into the body again, so you could have different hairstyles. Tiny Tears, some of you might remember Tiny Tears. She drank out of her bottle, cried little tears, and wet her nappy. And of course, Action Man, which was under license from as G.I. Joe from America, from Hasbro. So those 3 toys made Palitoy at that time. They all went on TV. They became. They got awards for Tiny Tears was 3 times the best doll in Britain. Action Man got the Toy of the Year, first year it was sold. And they made Palitoy. And then somebody came along, and it was this company called General Mills. It was an American company. They started off with 1 mill in about 1880 and grew and grew and grew, and then got into convenience foods like Cheerios, which is a breakfast cereal, and Betty Crocker stuff, and they went into restaurants and to fashion. But they bought out some toy companies, Kenner in America, Parker Brothers Games, board games, and they wanted to get into Europe, so they bought the Palitoy brand. Now, Miles Fletcher didn't want to work for an American company, so he cleared off to another company, toy company called Metto. But Bob Simpson, he then took over as managing director. And the 70s, Bob Simpson was responsible for seeing Palitoy go right through the 70s, building up different ranges, developing ranges in the design department where I worked. So Action Man got the 10-year Golden Award, the Toy of the Decade. More dolls were coming out like Pippa and Action Girl, Girls World. Games like Striker, which is a football game where you tapped him on the head and he kicked the ball. Mainline railways we did from scratch, and they were all made in Hong Kong and to our designs. Action figures from Mego, and Discovery Time toys for children that were preschool kiddies. And of course, Star Wars. So we come on to Star Wars now, the film that came out in 1977 in May in America, and of course all the British kids had to wait till 2 days after Christmas to see it on the screens. When that film came out, the American toy companies, they were a bit averse to doing any toys from it, because one of the big problems of films is if you make toys from a film and the film bombs out, the shops are left with loads of toys on the shelves and you can't get rid of them. And also, space films in those days, before 1977, were sort of like, they were known as B films, and they weren't very well made. So people were a bit reluctant to get involved in toys from this film. But there was a guy at Kenner called Bernie Loomis, and he could see toys in this, because he went to see the film and he saw toys. He called it toyetic. There was toys, 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 toys all the way through. So he signed a license with Kenner to do the toys, and Palitoy being part of the same group, we were the license, sub-license for the UK. First thing when it came over here, our people, Bob Simpson, Les Cook, who was marketing director, they didn't want to take it because of Action Man. Action Man was the flagship product of Palitoy, and it was selling like hotcakes. And they wanted to give it to Dennis Fisher. Now, Dennis Fisher was bought by General Mills in 1970 and became part of Palitoy. And they wanted to put it in there, but because they had $6 million man, so they didn't want it. Same reasons that, you know, of Action Man. So then Les Cook thought, well, I can put it into Bradgate, which is the wholesale division of Palitoy. And Bernie Loomis, who was over here sort of promoting the Star Wars range, he said, put Star Wars in the retail division and it will outsell Action Man and be a major force for the next 20 years. Bit of an understatement, that, I think. So it went in the retail, obviously. So it had to be sold to the it had to be sold to the sales team first, our Palitoy sales team. So they were sent off to see Star Wars. It had to be sold to the retailers. The toy fair at Palitoy, the toy fairs for the whole toy industry in the UK was held at the end of January. So a lot of the big retailers were sent to see Star Wars at that time. And this was try and get them to commit to buying, because they were still reluctant to buy these toys. And they just sort of stepped in with their toes and bought a few, you know. So I went to see this film as a special showing down in London in October, and that was my ticket. Roger Morrison, who was the tooling manager, who's here today, and myself, we went over to America in November '77, and we got to Cincinnati, where Kenner was, and they were just getting the first mouldings off the tooling for things like the TIE Fighter. So that was probably one of probably is the first TIE Fighter that was put together from the mouldings. And I took a photograph of Roger. That's Roger there, but he never took one of me. So I haven't got a photograph of me holding that. So this is how it looked in the catalogue. The figures were being shipped in bulk from the Kenner supplies in Hong Kong. The TIE Fighter, we borrowed the tools, and Roger got those moulded in I think it was probably at Aldridge Plastics in the West Midlands. The other two, the Land Speeder and the TIE Fighter, Roger arranged to have the drawings and the tooling patterns coming over from America, and he went out and got new tools for those, and we had to modify them slightly to get a price point in this country. That was taking the bonnet off the front of the Land Speeder, and that got rid of the moulding, and we took the electronics out of the TIE Fighter. We did some bit of design work based on the Kenner's designs, because we couldn't get the tooling for these, and we made these instead of injection moulding, we made them by vacuum forming. But the big thing was the Death Star. Now, that on the left is the Kenner Death Star, which is a great chunk of plastic, which we couldn't afford. We couldn't afford to tool that, and marketing couldn't afford to sell it because it would be too expensive in this country compared to America. So we did a card version of the Death Star, which everybody seems to want to get now. But this is the original mock-up of the Death Star. There was a company in London where we had to go through to get to 20th Century Fox to get things approved. Anything that was being merchandised in the UK went through this company. And there must have been a young lad there that thought, I'll do a card Death Star. And he mocked it up in a bit of card, and it got to us, and we had to make it work. So we redesigned it so that a child could put it together, so it could be made as like a flat pack in a flatter box, and it was easy to assemble. And we changed it. We put the chute in where when they dive down into the trash compactor, and we put the little trash compactor in and things like that. We added things to it. We put some stormtroopers on the printed card so that if kids didn't have many stormtroopers, at least there was some hovering about for battles and things. So that went really well. That never got in the catalogue of '78 because it wasn't developed until about July, August time, and it was actually produced around about October, ready for Christmas. So the next film, Empire Strikes Back. Of course, the retailers are getting quite, they needed the stuff now because it was doing so well, and we couldn't make enough for them. But what happened here was that the powers that be thought they should put it in Chad Valley catalogue. Now, Chad Valley was bought by General Mills and became part of Palitoy in 1978 when the toys first came out. And they thought they might boost Chad Valley a bit. But the marketing people and the salespeople said, no, you can't put it in Chad Valley. It's too prestigious for them. They're more like a preschool sort of brand. So it was sold by the Palitoy salesman, but through the Chad Valley catalogue at the toy fairs. And that was the first time when we saw the Millennium Falcon, because that was too expensive for us to make or mould in the first year.
And then, of course, 3 years later, we got Return of the Jedi. And as I said, Toy Fair was in January, where the retailers come to see the new toys ready for Christmas. So we had to show them the catalogue for, what's coming out for Return of the Jedi, because the film didn't come out till June. So we couldn't show much. So you got major new villain. Who's that? So it's just to sort of titivate these retailers so they could buy the product. Of course, that turned out to be Jabba. 1985, no films coming out. The three first films had already been made, and they had to do something, so they rebranded it as Power of the Force. And that basically was all the figures from the 3 films, and some new ones at the bottom that were never made before. But it's all from the 3 films and vehicles. The AT-AT, that was, we borrowed the tooling from Kenner for that, to mould that in this country and assemble it in the Colville factory. What about Action Man? It was getting a bit of a kick-in because kids wanted everything space. And we were lucky to have a designer joined us around this time called Greg Hughes. And he came up with the idea of the Space Rangers, to take Action Man into space. And then a few years later, he came up with Captain Zargon, which is basically an Action Man moulded in black, but he looks a bit like some other character I won't mention. But that wasn't the real reason Action Man was getting a kick-in. The big kick-in was because of size. Star Wars figures of 7 components and 1 operation to put it together, which is a sonic weld. Action Man has got about 30 parts in it and numerous operations. So there's lots of plastic in there. And during the 70s, there was 2 oil crises. One was OPEC putting up prices. The other one was the Arab-Israeli war. And of course, oil, plastics is a derivative of oil. So things were getting too expensive, and Action Man was getting very expensive. So what do? We reduced him down to Star Wars size, and we called him Action Force. But we kept the Action Man logo on just to show that continuity. But it was this time, it was 81, when Bob Simpson, who was managing director, who led Palitoy right through the 70s, he'd taken Palitoy just before it was bought by General Mills. It was about £300,000 turnover. He took it right through the 70s, building it up as managing director, up to the 80s, and it was a 30 million turnover by that time. And he could see the writing on the wall, how the toy industry was going. So he decided to get out, and he took Les Cook, the marketing director, with him, and the whole marketing section. And a new team came in, a new managing director called Peter Waterman, and a new marketing team. And they wanted to change this because of the Star Wars, basically, and the zeitgeist at the time was space and fantasy. So we changed Action Force to this fantasy concept, which is the red ones you see in the middle. That's Baron Ironblood in the whites and the red shadows. And they're trying to take over the world, a bit like James Bond, They're trying to take over the world, and the United Nations have got these teams of the Z-Force and the Underwater Force and the SAS, and trying to stop them do that. But this was a time of globalization and global branding. And the toy group, which Palitoy was part of, the General Mills Toy Group, was based in New York. And they started to think globally. And the companies like Palitoy, and there was one in France called Mira Meccano, there was Kenner and Parker in America, and various others. They thought, we want to do this global branding. So we want to do Europe as a whole, rather than have separate companies in different countries. But they can do their own marketing and selling, but the actual marketing will be covered by us. So they got rid of a lot of the toys that Palitoy were doing, like Pippa and Tiny Tears, and mainline railways went because it was not global, it was just British, and things like that. They got rid of those, and they started coming out with things like this, which is strawberry shortcake. It's a brand that was developed in the States, and it was sold throughout Europe. And this is where trilingual packaging came in. So you got English, German, and French on the packaging. So you could, if it didn't sell in one country, you could move it to Germany, say, or to France. And that was how they were working. And Bob Simpson, he'd built up ranges by developing toys at Palitoy and dealing with licensing with big companies, which were probably competitors of the American toy group. The other one was Care Bears. That was another thing that was developed in the States and was designed to sell globally. And of course, Star Wars was probably the first global brand of toys, because that sold all over the world, and it was recognised all over the world. So it's Star Wars that really started this. And so we come up to 85, and at Toy Fair we give out the catalogues, and Peter Wharton was saying what a great time we're having. He'd actually doubled what Bob Simpson had done, so it wasn't £30 million turnover now, it was £60 million turnover. And Star Wars toys, there was £3 million set aside for marketing support. So people are thinking now, you're probably thinking now, well, what happened to Palitoy? What happened to Kenner? And it was all because of this. Whoops. The great video games crash of 1983. You might not remember, but at the end of the 70s, video games were very big in the arcades in America, over here. And the toy companies were thinking, oh, we can make toys, because chips were coming down, the price of chips were coming down, the electronics were getting smaller and smaller, so they could go into smaller packages. And it was Parker Games that were given the job of designing the games. The group didn't design the machines, we designed the games to go on other people's machines. And it went really well for a year, they were making lots of money. But everybody else came into the market, from the Far East and here, there and everywhere, and they were cheap and nasty games. And there was a great crash, and the General Mills Toy Group lost about $10 million because of this. Now, General Mills is a food company, and their shareholders like a nice steady growth. And food growth is nice and steady, it just grows gradually. Toys is up and down. There was a saying at the time that a toy company only survives on the whim of an 8-year-old. If you haven't got the right toy, you've had it. So they were getting worried about this toy group. So they decided that they'd sell it off, a bit like when Castleloyd sold off to General Mills, basically. But so in November 85, it was spun off in America at the New York Stock Exchange as Kenner Parker. So the two main toy companies in America, and that was the name of the company. So at Colville, where I was working, the sign for Palitoy came down, and the sign for Kenner Parker went up. And then it was only 18 months or so, and it was sold off to Tonka. They borrowed a lot of money from the banks to buy it, but they unfortunately bought it on the Friday before Black Monday, so their share price dropped immediately. They struggled along until 1991 when Hasbro bought them for a song. They kept the Colville factory going for a while, but it was basically a distribution centre. It wasn't manufacturing anything except for Play-Doh. And in 1994, they closed the factory and they sold it to a property company in Leicester. And now it's a business centre. So Hasbro now own the Star Wars licence. So what do? They rehashed Power of the Force in 1995 in a sort of a muscular sort of looking framework. And when George Lucas did his special edition trilogies with the more scenes and the more CGI, they flagged it up as that. Then the films started coming out again with George Lucas coming out with the prequels from 1999 onwards. Of course, he sold the rights to the film to Disney in 2012, and they started doing the sequels up to the 40th anniversary, 2018, when the toys first came out. Now, at that time, I was in Colville. We had a museum called the Snibston Discovery Museum, and the council wanted to close it because it was costing a lot of money to maintain it. And we had the Friends of Snibston trying to save it, and I joined them because a lot of the toys were in that museum from Palitoy. And of course we failed. But at that time I said to Colville Heritage Society, who were part of the Friends, there's some great anniversaries coming up, and one of them is the 40th anniversary of Star Wars, 2018. We ought to do something. And, that's the 40th anniversary Hasbro figures, but I saw this in Leicester. I don't know if anybody went to it, at the New Walk Museum. Matt Fox, he showed his collection and his memorabilia of Star Wars. And I went down to have a look at it, and I got in contact with him and said, look, can you bring that to Palitoy, Colville, the old Palitoy factory, because that's the spiritual home of the Star Wars toys in this country. He says, yeah, we'll come down. We came down, and luckily the North West Leicester District Council put up the money to do that, and we put on a show. This is setting it up. There's Matt Fox with the Death Star. There's me and Stuart Warburton, who's the Secretary of the Colville Heritage Society, being interviewed by Leicester Mercury. And we sent the first 12 Star Wars figures via a high-altitude weather balloon 12 miles into space from the Palitoy factory. And after we got them back, took a while to get them back, because they got lost, but somebody found them walking their dog in a field. They were auctioned off for charity. But the only figure I kept of Star Wars was that Stormtrooper. That's the only one I had at home. And I snuck him into the capsule that was going up into space. And so I've still got that one. So that's what we did. So going back to the time of The Empire Strikes Back was when Star Wars was really at its height. The BBC got word of what was happening and everything, and they came to Palitoy at Colville, and they did a film about it all, and they called Palitoy a gold mine on top of a coal mine. Now, 3 years later, after that visit by the BBC, Palitoy, the gold mine, was no longer there. It had become Kenner Parker, and the coal mine, of course, had closed because the whole coal industry basically was closed. But we wanted to keep the heritage going at Colville Heritage Society, and another anniversary was coming up, which was 2019, when 100 years after Alf Pallet had started his Castleoy company in Leicester in 1919. So we got money from the lottery Heritage Fund, and we were able to design and put on a big exhibition in the old Palitoy factory in Colville. And we're still carrying on. We've got to finish it this year, this project, because we have to spend the money that the lottery's given us, basically. So that's what's been happening. If you keep an eye out, there will be a website coming up soon from Colville Heritage Society where you can see all the Palitoy toys and interviews with people that used to work there and things like that. So I'm leaving you with this. Somebody we know at the top. And thank you for listening. And I'm not going to take any questions because my time is up. But myself and Roger Morrison, who was in charge of tooling, will be sitting outside on the Palitoy stand. And if you want any ask any questions, come and see us. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit panthertracks.com or check out the free Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@panthertracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Panther Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK, 4 PM Eastern, 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out our Panther Tracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday night at 7 PM UK time for new episodes of The Panther from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks. And that's me done for this episode.
Coming up next on Panther Tracks Radio, it's Start Your Engines.